Carl Jung's assertion that shame is a soul-eating emotion cuts to the heart of one of the most destructive forces in human psychology. Unlike guilt, which focuses on specific actions, I did something wrong, shame corrodes the core of one's identity, I am wrong. It is not merely a fleeting feeling of regret but a pervasive, consuming belief in one's inherent unworthiness. To understand why Jung equated shame with the devouring of the soul, we must explore its origins, its psychological mechanisms, and its profound impact on human behavior. Shame does not simply wound, it metastasizes, distorting self-perception, stifling authenticity, and fragmenting the psyche. By examining how shame operates, both within the individual and across societies, we uncover why Jung viewed it as a poison to the soul and how its shadows shape everything from personal relationships to cultural norms. At its root, shame emerges from the collision between our authentic selves and the expectations imposed by others. Jung's concept of the shadow, the repressed, unconscious aspects of the psyche deemed unacceptable by the conscious mind, helps illuminate this dynamic. When aspects of our being, desires, flaws, vulnerabilities, clash with societal ideals or internalized moral standards, we exile them to the shadow. Shame arises when these exiled parts threaten to surface, triggering a visceral fear of exposure and rejection. A child mocked for crying learns to equate vulnerability with weakness. An adult ridiculed for unconventional dreams buries their aspirations. Over time, shame becomes a reflexive response to anything that risks revealing the unacceptable self. This internalized rejection is what Jung termed soul-eating. It erodes the individual's connection to their true essence, replacing self-compassion with self-loathing. The soul, in Jungian terms, represents the totality of the psyche, the interplay of light and shadow. Shame disrupts this wholeness, turning the self into both persecutor and victim. The behavioral consequences of shame are as insidious as they are varied. To avoid the agony of exposure, individuals often construct elaborate masks. Perfectionism, people-pleasing, and emotional withdrawal are common strategies to hide perceived inadequacies. Consider the high achiever who drives themselves to burnout, not out of ambition, but from a terror of being found out as mediocre. Or the person who sabotages intimate relationships, convinced they are unlovable. Shame thrives in secrecy, convincing its host that their flaws are uniquely grotesque, unshared by others. This isolation fuels cycles of self-punishment. Addiction, self-harm, or compulsive behaviors become rituals of atonement for the crime of existing imperfectly. Paradoxically, shame can also manifest as aggression or contempt toward others. By projecting their self-hatred outward, mocking others' vulnerabilities, and enforcing rigid social hierarchies, individuals temporarily deflect their own shame. Bullying, bigotry, and moral grandstanding often mask profound insecurity. In this way, shame perpetuates harm both inwardly and outwardly, creating a feedback loop of pain. Culturally, shame operates as a tool of social control. Societies codify norms around gender, sexuality, success, and morality, branding deviations as shameful. Taboos around mental illness, poverty, or failure enforce conformity by equating struggle with moral failure. For instance, the stigma surrounding addiction often prevents individuals from seeking help, as admitting the problem risks public shaming. Similarly, cultures that prize hypermasculinity may shame men for expressing vulnerability, leading to emotional repression and relational dysfunction. These collective shames become woven into the fabric of identity, perpetuated through generations. Families pass down cycles of shame, a parent's criticism of a child's weight echoing their own childhood humiliation. Yet shame's power depends on silence, it withers under empathy. Movements advocating for mental health awareness, body positivity, or LGBTQ+ rights challenge shame by reframing flaws as facets of human diversity. Jung's emphasis on individuation, the integration of the shadow into conscious awareness, aligns with this liberation. By confronting shame, individuals reclaim disowned parts of themselves, transforming self-rejection into self-acceptance. The distinction between shame and guilt is critical here. Guilt, when healthy, serves as a moral compass, prompting reparative action. I hurt someone, I should apologize. Shame, by contrast, offers no such redemption. It collapses the entirety of the self into the transgression. I am a terrible person. This collapse explains shame's toxicity. Neurobiological studies reveal that shame activates the same brain regions as physical pain, underscoring its visceral intensity. Over time, chronic shame rewires the brain, heightening sensitivity to rejection and fostering hypervigilance. The ashamed individual becomes trapped in a mental hall of mirrors, interpreting neutral interactions as confirmation of their inadequacy. A friend's delayed reply morphs into proof of their unworthiness. A minor mistake at work spirals into existential despair. This cognitive distortion isolates them further, as withdrawing from connection becomes preferable to risking exposure. Jungian therapy seeks to dismantle shame by inviting the shadow into the light. Through techniques like active imagination or dream analysis, individuals dialogue with their disowned parts, not as enemies but as neglected aspects of the self. A man ashamed of his anger might discover it stems from unmet needs for respect. A woman ashamed of her sexuality might uncover societal conditioning that equates desire with impurity. By reframing these shameful traits as human, rather than monstrous, the individual begins to reintegrate their psyche. This process is not intellectual but experiential, a visceral reclamation of wholeness. Art, ritual, and storytelling often facilitate this, allowing shame to be expressed symbolically rather than suppressed. For example, writing a letter to one's shamed younger self or creating art that embodies hidden emotions externalizes the pain, making it manageable. Ultimately, Jung's warning about shame's soul-eating nature is a call to courage. To confront shame is to risk vulnerability, to stand in the unbearable gap between who we are and who we believe we should be. Yet in this space, healing begins. Cultures and individuals who cultivate compassion, for themselves and others, starve shame of its power. Parenting that prioritizes empathy over punishment, workplaces that normalize failure as part of growth, and relationships grounded in mutual vulnerability all chip away at shame's foundations. The soul, in Jung's vision, is not a static entity but a dynamic process of becoming. Shame interrupts this process, freezing the individual in a cycle of self-attack. To dissolve shame is to resume the journey toward wholeness, where the full spectrum of human experience, light and shadow, is embraced not as a threat, but as the essence of being alive. In this sense, Jung's insight is both a diagnosis and a prescription. To recognize shame's destructiveness is the first step in reclaiming the soul it seeks to consume.